Order. Richard Fuller to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Sir Graham. I beg to move that this House has considered the effect of house building targets in North East Bedfordshire. I am delighted to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Graham, a very particular pleasure. And I'm also very grateful to the Speaker for calling this debate at this time, because it enables me to engage directly with the Minister on the existing impacts of high levels of house building in my constituency ahead of his finalisation with the Secretary of State of the forthcoming Planning Act. And, Sir Graham, I'd also like to place on the record my thanks to the Minister for his willingness to meet with me on, I've lost count, but multiple occasions already to discuss the particular effects of development on my constituency from a wide variety of sources: the construction of East-West Rail, the creation of development corporations, in my mind the highly questionable 2017 Oxford-Cambridge ARC proposals from the National Infrastructure Commission, road improvements including on the A1 at Black Cat roundabout, and the processes of the local plans for both Central Bedfordshire and Bedford Borough Council. The Minister has always been open to discussions. I'm very grateful for that. In this short debate, I would like to cover aspects relating to the Conservative Party manifesto commitment to infrastructure first, the Department's views on housing consequences from the East-West Rail and other transport decisions, the environmental impacts of particular concern in areas where local authorities are having to meet well above average growth targets for housing, and some critical requests from me for consideration by the Minister in the forthcoming Planning Act. Let me start with some context. My constituency is already recording housing growth at roughly 3 times the average of all members of this House. The National House Building Council provides these statistics. In 2018, North East Bedfordshire new homes registered was 2.2 times the national average. In 2019, it was 2.9 times the average. And last year it was 3.5 times the average. And, Sir Graham, we anticipate that increasing rate will continue to go up on a relative terms. Moreover, the Office for National Statistics states that in terms of absolute population growth in the decade to 2026, the local authority of Central Bedfordshire, which covers part of my constituency, ranks second only to Leicester of all local authorities outside London in terms of absolute population growth. The population of North East Bedfordshire is already growing fast. That rate of growth is getting faster, and the absolute growth in population will be one of the highest in the country. The effects of this house building is already having an impact on the availability of local services. Difficulties in accessing GP services are already being felt across my constituency, from Arlesey and Stotfold to Biggleswade and Sandy to Harold and to Sharnbrook. Residents contact me to say how increasingly difficult it is to get access to GP services. This is not to do with the issues of COVID. This is to do with accessibility directly because of population growth. The House of Commons reports changes in GPs, trainees and locums for clinical commissioning groups across the country. Sir Graham, for the Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes and Luton CCG, they report a 6% decrease since 2019 in the number of qualified permanent GPs. And as of December 2019, in the Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes and Luton Clinical Commissioning Group, which covers my constituency, there were 2,112 patients for full-time equivalent GP, compared with 1,722 in England as a whole. So there is already a disparity in access to GP services, and this is only likely to grow given the growth in numbers of housing. Now, both the Minister and I, and indeed yourself, Sir Graham, stood on a manifesto commitment for infrastructure first, pledging that we would ensure new roads and services are in place before people move into new homes. So I'd like to ask the Minister, does he acknowledge that ensuring access to GPs and to school places are crucial principles of our Infrastructure First pledge? And will he commit to an urgent review with his colleagues in the health and education departments to assess the current and projected requirements for my constituency and of their plans for improvements. Let me now turn to other aspects of infrastructure, roads and railways, of which my constituency has many, in part thanks to a 2019 National Infrastructure Commission report titled Partnering for Prosperity, chaired by Lord Adonis, which stated with reference to the area between Oxford and Cambridge that, quote, without swift and determined action to overcome the area's housing crisis, it will fall behind its international competitors and fail to attract and retain the talent and skills it needs. I won't wish to question that, although I do feel that somehow that was a bit tendacious in its expectation. But this technocratic report went on to state, quote, if the ARC is to maximise its economic potential, current rates of house building will need to double, delivering up to 1 million new homes by 2050. But of course, this target of 1 million was wrong. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. The target included an allocation of overspill of 230,000 or more from London. It was based not on the fulfilment of the projections, but on the over-fulfilment of the highest projection of growth for the area. In short, it was a number plucked out of thin air by Lord Adonis to get a PR-ready headline, but it bears only a tangential relationship to reality. Yet this 1 million homes figure remains as a potential threat to my local authorities in central Bedfordshire and Bedford Borough for their already successful plans for housing growth. So, can the Minister today reassure me that this fantasy figure of 1 million new homes in the Oxcam ARC is no longer playing a role in housing targets for the area? Now, I know from my discussions with CPRE and local environmental groups in Bedfordshire that there are considerable concerns that the rate of growth of housing means that biodiversity and access to green spaces are threatened. Does the Minister recognise that these frequently heard concerns, which I know concern him also, are even more important in areas of considerable housing growth? And will he commit that developments in central Bedfordshire and Bedford Borough local authority areas will be required to embed environmental considerations from the very start of the planning process, rather than being considerations somewhat later down the track? I believe, Sir Graham, that if we are to have and to ensure in those areas where housing development is considerably above the national average, that we really do need to prioritise access to our environment for those residents, and that does need action by the Minister, by the Department, to move forward those considerations right to the start of the planning process. Now, a key part of the National Infrastructure Commission report was the creation of the East-West Railway, linking Oxford to Cambridge and to points either side beyond. This project is well underway, but the process has created concerns and confusion for many of my residents. Now, I do not want to draw the Minister into the transport-related matters of that particular process, but can he advise me on a couple of points? Firstly, in the discussions with local authorities regarding the East-West Rail project, were there ever any considerations of consequential requirements for additional housing made by his department or the Transport Department? And if so, what were those additional requirements? Secondly, the Minister may be aware that, in part at the request of the leadership of Bedford Borough Council, East-West Railway is now planned to go via the town centre and then north across my constituency. Now, for many of my residents, that was a considerable surprise. It was a surprise partly because the recommendation of Bedford Borough Council was put in to the consultation without the mayor or the leadership letting his councillors know that he was putting it on, to give them a vote to put it in. It was a surprise because people saw that route and they thought it was longer, more costly, and hillier than alternatives. Now, I'm agnostic on what the route decision should be, but I'm not agnostic on the facts that underpin decisions when they're made, Sir Graham. As we know, with these very large infrastructure decisions, it's important that local communities understand and see that the process is transparent, that they can understand and see the data that is underlying it. So given the surprise, and not related to transport matters, particularly and specifically on housing matters, can the Minister advise me if this particular route decision to go through the town amended any expectation of consequential housing growth over any other route options? Now, he may not, Sir Graham, the Minister may not have answers to those two questions today, but if he would commit to writing to me on those, I'd be very grateful. Now, as I mentioned, Sir Graham, my constituency has multiple chains planned or in progress, yet I'm advised by local authorities that the level of coordination between government departments over changes in water routes, over railways, over road and other utilities is extremely poor, and that causes greater uncertainty in the preparation of local plans and greater disruption for residents. So may I ask the Minister to pay particular regard to improving this coordination in his forthcoming planning bill, and further may I encourage him in his efforts to reform SIL as part of the effort to give local authorities the resources they need to fund required infrastructure. Now, Minister, the planning bill offers a positive vision for enabling housing developments to proceed more effectively and with more, not less, local community involvement. Does the Minister agree with me that any future changes in planning regulations should include and indeed enhance the involvement of local people in shaping and protecting their communities? And does the Minister share my desire that the voice of local residents, via easier access to proposed developments in their areas, by empowering neighbourhood plans to have real teeth, by promoting micro-scale developments and encouraging more smaller local builders, and by closing loopholes for creepy developers to exploit, should be clear objectives of his plan and his bill. I know from discussions with town and parish councillors in Potton, in Upper Caldecote, in Everton and Harrold in particular, that these are aspects of reform that are crucial to them. Reassurance of the power of democratic involvement in the planning of local communities is particularly important for North East Bedfordshire, given the scale of change. So can the Minister also advise me what his department sees as the respective roles of the spatial framework, development corporations and local authorities in setting and meeting housing targets in my constituency? And finally, some points, further points on the Planning Act, Sir Graham. Because of the market failure in house building, there needs to be greater recognition of the social contract in fulfilling the country's ambitions for making home ownership more accessible. Now, the Local Government Association says there is already planning permission for over 1.1 million homes. And currently, there are no real penalties for failure to build when permission is granted. Now, this free ride should end, with existing approvals given a build-by sunset clause on planning rights, and all new permissions issued with a build and council tax schedule. Without such action, the ability of local authorities to fulfil their part of the social government, from the social contract, from the national government's objectives to local plans for housing, to neighbourhood and parish councils' control over what happens in their communities, and to builders to build what the country demands and requires of them, will be fundamentally undermined. So I do hope the Minister will bear those in mind. Those are particular concerns for North East Bedfordshire. Sir Graham, the value of this debate today, for me, has been able to demonstrate to the Minister that in one of the constituencies in the country that is facing some of the most considerable change, potential change and current change, of which house building is a crucial part, is an area where his department and his ambitions for the planning bill can have real impact and real context. And I do hope that he will take away some of the points that I've made today as he finalises his preparation for the plan.
The question is that this House has considered the effect of house building targets in North East Bedfordshire constituency. Minister.
Well, thank you, Sir Graham, and it's a great pleasure, as ever, to serve under your chairmanship, and a great pleasure to reply to the debate secured by my honourable friend, who is a doughty champion for his constituents in North East Bedfordshire. I'm grateful to him for his kind words in his remarks. He's right, we will always continue to engage in dialogue to make sure that we get planning reforms, particularly for his constituency, right. I think I'm speaking to him and his colleagues in Bedfordshire later today, and we'll continue to maintain that dialogue. If I can begin, Sir Graham, by reminding you and others in the chamber that our country does not have enough homes. The average house price in England is around 8 times higher than average gross earnings. And in London and in other parts of the country, including parts of the Oxcam arc, it's around 12 times higher. Now, I'm pleased that the figures from 2019 to 2020 demonstrate that housing supply increased by some 244,000 new homes, the highest increase in over 30 years. But we have an unwavering commitment to build more, and by the middle of this decade to deliver at least 300,000 new homes each year to ensure that we address the housing challenge that we have. We've already brought forward a number of proposals out with our planning white paper to improve housing supply, changes to permitted development rights, for example, the changes to use class orders, which make for a more flexible and responsive system, which will allow for the more gentle densification of urban and suburban areas, which means that the weight can thereby be taken off some of the greener spaces that we all want to protect and enjoy. We've got a bold and ambitious vision for the future of planning and house building in our country, much of which was set out in the white paper, and we'll bring forward the planning bill in this session of Parliament to make the planning process clearer, more accessible and more certain for all users, improving the quality, quantity and speed of home building. Because that engagement, as my honourable friend said, is absolutely crucial. It's not just about building more homes, it's about engaging more people, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on in my remarks, because we must ensure that the right homes are delivered in the right places for communities across our country, and that new development brings with it the schools, the hospitals, the GP surgeries, the transport links that local communities need, and which my honourable friend champions, whilst at the same time protecting our unmatchable natural environment. My friend made a few early remarks about local housing need. Let me just say in context that the local housing need numbers for his constituency remain those that we posited back in 2018. They have not changed as a result of the consultation that we undertook last year. I'd also remind him that the standard method for local housing need calculation doesn't set a target, it's simply a starting point in the process of planning for new homes, and local authorities will still need to consider any constraints that they face locally to assess how many homes can be built in their area, as opposed to how many the local housing need calculation may suggest. And I would point him to my dear colleague letter from memory, I think it was the 18th of December last year, that makes that very clear. I congratulate him, by the way, for the work that his own council is doing in making sure that homes are built. Now, the planning for the future white paper, which we published last year, sets out our vision for the planning system. We had some 44,000 responses to that consultation, Sir Graham, a very substantial amount of interest, and we are working our way through them and consulting with stakeholders, big and small, as well as colleagues in the House, to ensure that we fully understand feedback and that we represent and reflect it as best as we possibly can. We want to get this right. We don't want to get it done quickly, and we're taking our time to address the feedback. Our proposals for reforming the planning system will make it simpler and quicker and more accessible for local people to engage in, which is what I think my honourable friend wants for his constituents. Because right now, something like 1% of local people get involved in local plan making. 1%. That's not many more than the planning officials in a local authority and their blood relations. The number that get involved in an individual planning application rises to a whacking 3% of the local population. And yet, after a very oftentimes tortuous process, plan applications can take 5 years to go through, 9 in every 10, 90% are passed. That suggests to me, Sir Graham, a system which is not particularly engaging and not necessarily very democratic, where communities have a real say in what is built around them. And we want to change that with our reforms. We want to modernise the system, and by digitalisation we believe that local communities can have a much clearer say in what is built for them, how it looks, where it goes, what the infrastructure should be, and what the design of those buildings should be too. Now, my honourable friend in his remarks pointed out the importance of infrastructure first. Now, we agree with that. I'll certainly be very happy to take forward his request with my colleagues in the DFE and also in DHSC. But let me say that the infrastructure levy that we propose is designed to ensure that developers pay for their fair share of affordable housing and infrastructure through a simpler, a faster and a more transparent infrastructure levy. We all know that Section 106, which takes up the lion's share of developer contributions, is slow, rather like the planning system, is opaque, rather like the planning system, and results, rather like the planning system, in outcomes which weren't necessarily expected by the local community at the outset of their expectations. The levy will be collected and spent at a local level, with upfront infrastructure priorities such as schools and GP surgeries being at the heart of the proposition. It will also, incidentally, enable the speedy introduction of our First Homes initiative, which will enable local first-time buyers, key workers to get on the housing ladder by providing them with discounted properties. And in constituencies like his own and nearby constituencies where the cost of housing is significantly, or oftentimes significantly above average earnings, that will be a mechanism to help his local constituents stay local, get on the property ladder and achieve their aspiration of having a stake in the country. And that's out with the National House Building Fund, which the Chancellor announced at the SR and also at the budget, some £7.1 billion of funding for infrastructure, which we reckon will unlock something like 860,000 units for housing development across our country. We also want to create more beautiful places through asking local authorities to develop their own design codes, setting the standards that new developments will be expected to meet. One of the biggest concerns that many of our constituents have when new development is proposed around them is, what is it going to look like? Is it going to look the way I would like my community to look? And giving local people and local stakeholders much more say in what those design codes will be, will, I think, make our planning system that much more consensual, and it also make the design of new builds really coherent with the local community, doing away with the anywheresville that perhaps too many places have suffered from for too long. We will publish our responses to the white paper, Sir Graham, as soon as we can. But as I said, we want to make sure we get this right, get it done quickly, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for colleagues across the House to continue to talk to ministers to make sure that we get the proposals right. Now, my honourable friend also raised a number of questions about the Oxcam ARC. Let me say in introduction, Sir Graham, that we believe that the Oxcam ARC, over quite a period of time to the middle of this century, can support the creation of 2 million extra jobs and add over £110 billion per year to our economy. It's one of the fastest growing economic areas of our country. So there's a real opportunity to engender prosperity and growth for our people. But I'm conscious that he has some concerns. So let me say to him that the ambition to build 1 million homes in the Oxcam ARC was a recommendation of the National Infrastructure Commission's Partnering for Prosperity report. And whilst we're clear that we want to see more homes built, and let's remember the Oxcam ARC is not a small space, it stretches from the north of Northamptonshire right down to the borders with London. Let me be clear that the 1 million home number is not a specific government policy or indeed a target. But we do want to maximise the number of homes that can be built across our country. He also mentioned the importance of the environment. We want to make sure that we're baking in the Environment Bill, its requirement for biodiversity net gain, nature recovery networks, into our planning reforms, and we're working out how most effectively to do that as the Environment Bill has become an act, and now we need to take into account it. He also mentioned East-West Rail. The railway will pass through North East Bedfordshire. I point my honourable friend to the commitment the government has made to explore new settlement opportunities around stations such as Thamesford and the St Neots area, so that, subject to appropriate community consultation, development can be delivered in the right places and in the right way. And we're supporting Bedford Borough Council to develop its locally led vision for the realisation of the full benefits of East-West Rail. I'm sure my honourable friend has contributed to the consultation. It closes today. I'll encourage anybody else that still has the time to do so. But can I reinforce the message that whilst we're working with places to understand opportunities for more housing, including Bedford, and what the advantages East-West Rail will bring, housing targets continue to be determined by planning policy and by local plans. He asked also, Sir Graham, to hear a commitment from the government that local people, local communities need to be involved in the planning process, and when changes are made, then their voices need to be heard. Let me agree with him. It is absolutely our intent to engage more people in the planning process at an earlier point in the process, so they can have a real say in the way their communities are designed, what should go where, what it should look like. And we believe that the proposals that we are tabling, which we're refining and which we'll bring forward shortly, will achieve that purpose. More engagement, more say where it counts. In conclusion, Sir Graham, if I've not answered my little friend's remaining questions, I'm very happy to write to him, meet him, speak to him through whatever forum to allay any concerns or address any ideas he has. But can I congratulate him on securing this important debate for his constituents? I hope he and you, Sir Graham, will see that the government is committed to delivering a planning system that will truly level up for all the communities in our country and make a system that is fit for purpose and that works for all, that delivers a faster, more transparent and more predictable outcome for everybody in our country. So we build the homes that we need, to the design that we want, to the standards that we expect, with the infrastructure that communities need, and we can all be proud of our planning for the future.